Slave breeding farms were established across the Americas in the 18th and 19th centuries to increase the enslaved population without purchasing more people. Enslaved women were often forced to bear children who were then immediately sold or put to work. The idea was to create a self-sustaining labor force. These women were valued only for their ability to create laborers for the owner's economic gain. Slave breeders paired women and men based on physical traits to increase fertility rates. These forced unions reflected a disturbing preference for maximizing profits over human dignity. The practice was widespread in the United States, but also extended to places like Brazil and on the Caribbean. These regions were major hubs for sugar, coffee, and tobacco production, all relying on enslaved labor. In Virginia, advertisements for prime breeding stock were published in newspapers, referring to enslaved women as mere reproductive units. These ads ignored the humanity of enslaved people. Children born on breeding farms were immediately considered property of the slave owner. These children had no rights as their very existence was shaped by forced reproduction. Breeding farms existed as a business model. Slave traders and owners often profited from the sale of enslaved babies, born through forced sexual intercourse. The forced reproduction system often meant families were separated forever. Parents and children, once born, could be sold to different slave owners, breaking all familial ties. Slave owners viewed human life as a commodity to be manipulated for profit. Enslaved people, particularly women, were reduced to mere property in this system. Slave breeding farms played a crucial role in sustaining plantation economies. The practice increased the number of enslaved people without the need to buy new slaves from Africa. Some breeders kept meticulous records of enslaved people's fertility cycles. These reports determined when enslaved women were forced to breed. Women who resisted forced breeding were often punished severely. This violence was part of a system that aimed to strip away any semblance of personal autonomy. Enslaved people were frequently treated as livestock. In the Caribbean, slave breeding was used to increase the workforce for sugar plantations. Enslaved children born on these farms were destined for hard labor from a young age. Some enslaved people were bred for specialized labor. Men and women were paired not only for reproduction, but also for specific skills needed on plantations like sugarcane and tobacco fields. The practice of slave breeding led to lasting trauma. The children produced were often raised in harsh, isolated conditions with no regard for their well-being or psychological development. As the demand for cotton grew, so did the prevalence of breeding farms. The Southern economy relied heavily on slave labor, and breeding more enslaved people helped to meet the demand. Slave breeding was considered by some as a necessary evil, which I don't agree with. Slavery is never a good thing, and it causes immeasurable suffering. These facts aim to provide a thorough and engaging overview while being sensitive to the painful history of slave breeding farms. If your family had any form of slavery in it, I am very sorry for the suffering it caused and wish you a very blessed and healthy life. What are your thoughts on slave breeding farms? Leave a comment below and let me know.